last meeting about maybe going over if we needed to, but let's try not to. Okay? Thanks for coming, everyone. There will be a piece of paper going around. If there is a piece of paper going around, if you could write your name on it and your town, that would be much appreciated. I'm Alice, I'm the chair. I think most of you have been here before, so you know basically who's who. I'm going to talk about the outcomes, the desired outcomes of the meeting, what we're going to talk about. Obviously, if new things come up, we will try to fit them in. Then we're going to approve the minutes, the last minutes from the 22nd. Then I'm going to go ahead and talk about process. I've done this several times, and obviously what we're doing is talking about process. But I think based on the Vernon meeting that happened a couple weeks ago or last week, I thought it might be helpful just to remind all of us what we signed up for with the grant and with the study committee, and what our timing is and what we're supposed to be considering. And during that section, Amy's invited Amy to talk as clerk to talk to us about open meeting law, and Ron's going to talk to us about freedom of information. Then we're going to ask you guys to speak. That'll be your time, 3 to 5 minutes per person. If it runs over, we usually go over, but try to keep it pretty contained, and we'll sort of sweep across. So we do that, tend to do it at the beginning of the meeting. And then during the meeting, because it is a work session, we were for the first couple months really doing a back and forth exchange. Now we're really trying to get some stuff done, so we'll probably not address public comments or questions during that point, but do write them down, and if we have time at the end, we'll do it then. Okay? Then we're going to go through the report, talk about whether we need to be looking at other things as well as at this stage, then talk about timeline, public information campaign, and future meetings and discussions. So why don't we go ahead and, is there a motion to approve the minutes from the 22nd?
So moved.
Okay, any discussion? Everyone just looked at them? Everyone's looked at them, we're good? No discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, so let me go over process, and one could speak hours about process with Act 46, but so let's try to keep it pretty contained. Our 5 towns got together in November. Well, before November, our superintendent came and asked us whether we wanted to join a study committee. The study committee was to consider unification, so we all signed up for that. In our first meeting, I guess it was the second meeting, we all voted to look at the accelerated merger first, and we have been doing that. As my job as chair is to keep us focused on that until someone puts a motion up to not be suggesting that we not look at that any further. But as chair, I see it as my duty to keep us focused on that until there is interest by the board, by the committee to head in a different direction. So that is what we're doing. At the 3rd or 4th meeting, I think we signed off, or sooner we signed off on a study committee grant. And that was a grant which confirmed that we are a 706B study committee, which we knew already. A 706B study committee means we're a study committee that is defined by statute, 706B, which is a part of Act 46. We have very clear guidelines. We're a legal group. We follow open meeting policy. We post our agendas. We post our minutes. We have a very clear goal to consider unification, and that is what we have done to get together as the 5 of us, 5 towns. So that's been our process. We're chugging away at it. There has been, before just March 22nd in the afternoon, and I did not read this email, and I wish someone had brought it up at the board, but I don't know if anyone else had read the email yet either. So we met on March 22nd, but that afternoon Mike Hebert sent an email to a large group, which we are all a part, saying that the minutes were, I don't know the quote, but saying that the minutes did not reflect activities. Does anyone know? That were uninformative. No one brought that up last time. I didn't read it. Everyone passed the minutes. No one suggested or rose that these minutes were not informative. We all agreed that they were. So I think we do need to be very careful with reading our minutes, because he then asked for a request for information. The suggestion is that we are not upfront. I feel very strongly that we are. We all agreed that those were good minutes. So I would encourage us to keep looking at information, reviewing how we share information. And this is a good time for Amy to remind us for when we do not share information appropriately.
So I asked Barb Nowakowski to email the group, forward you guys all a link, and cite several items. It's from the frequently asked questions about Vermont open meeting law from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. So open meeting law is, as we know, the intent is to create transparency in government by requiring advance public notice and opportunity for public participation in decisions, governmental decisions. You can read through the attachment that you were sent. The open meeting law applies to every public body like ours, and it applies whenever there is a quorum of the body, and this is actually a meeting, and a quorum is a majority of the total members of the body. A meeting is defined as a gathering of a quorum of the members of a public body for the purpose of discussing the business of the body or for the purpose of taking an action. And this applies regardless of physical location of the members. So the members don't all have to be in the same room at the same time for it to be considered a meeting under the law. It could be a phone conversation, it could potentially be an email. And furthermore, time is not a factor. If a conversation occurs over a period of time, for instance, in the string of emails, that conversation may still amount to a meeting under the law. So I think this is where the concern has been coming up here lately. And one of the things listed in this frequently asked questions is, the question is raised, do group emails violate the open meeting law? And the answer is not necessarily. Group emails may be used to schedule a meeting, create an agenda, or to distribute materials to discuss at a meeting. Group emails should never be used for discussion purposes, which is why you should avoid hitting the reply all button. Emails must generally be available for copying and inspection as public records. So this is a lesson to not hit the reply all and not respond. Because we have seen that. We can't have that kind of dialogue. We put ourselves in jeopardy.
What if it's, we've gotten information that hasn't been just from study committee members, sent to all of us?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything we should know on that?
I would say not to reply to it. If you do reply to it, you should reply directly to the person. You should never reply all. Is that your?
I'm just thinking like Richard sent something to us here just recently.
Yeah.
This morning maybe even.
Yeah.
And so if I hit back and say, thank you for this, I'm in trouble?
No, because
No.
we haven't had discussion about it.
Yeah, I think you can acknowledge.
But you want to acknowledge it to him directly.
Right.
You don't want to, once you engage, you're discussing. You're offering an opinion. Right.
And then the other thing too about meeting minutes, the open meeting law specifies that minutes have to be taken at every meeting. They don't need to be taken in executive sessions, but they are a public record of the events of the meeting. And they don't have to be a transcript of the meeting. Meeting minutes have to give a true indication of the business of the meeting, which may require supplementing the following statutorily required elements. Members present, active participants at the meeting, motions, proposals, and resolutions made, offered and considered, and what disposition is made of the same. Results of any votes taken, and a record of individual votes if a roll call is taken. And meeting minutes have to be available for inspection 5 days after the meeting. So, and it's generally assumed that these are calendar days, not business days. So, but all that is in that link that I had Barb send everybody, so there's a lot more details, so.
And that's going to go up on the WSES website too.
So the question is any emails and stuff that was floating around, are they be printed off and handed over?
Well,
Well,
I'm
that's
gonna
what
do
I-
that next.
Okay.
So you're wondering how to respond to his request, Mike Hubert's request? for
Not so much
information?
me, but just as a group, what is our,
Yeah.
well, that's Ron, I'll like to hear from Ron.
So does anyone have any questions for Amy or any discussion about open meeting laws, or we all feel pretty good about it?
Actually, how does this apply to individual conversations over email? One person discussing with another member of this group?
That's not a quorum.
Yeah.
So a quorum in our setting, did you get,
Yeah.
so you want to talk about that?
Before we
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Kim and I were just thinking on the way over of what's going up on the website, you know, that we talked about, and the question or the thought I had is we probably, and this came up because tomorrow we have Brattleboro's Act 46 Study Committee, or Act 46 Forum with the community.
Yeah.
And I had, Annette Cappy had sent us all the town rep names so we could send out the blurb inviting them and letting them know. And all three of our legislators came back and said, please send us any handouts that come. And I said, well, I think it'll go up on the website. And it occurs to me that probably from here, every handout we have, we should probably be putting up. And I think we're getting close to that, but
Yeah.
just to be aware of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just updated the website, there's probably like 12 documents that
Yeah.
we've reviewed here around there. So you asked about quorum?
Yeah.
So this body has 9 voting members, we have 6 alternates, and so a quorum would be 5 of the voting members. An alternate would vote if the voting member is absent. So you wouldn't have 15 voting members of this body, but 9, so quorum is 5. And Barb Nowakowski mentioned that in Robert's rules for board representation, like we do for the supervisory union board meetings, we have 5 boards represented, Brattleboro, Dummerston, Putney, Guilford, and Vernon. UHS is not represented. If you remember early on with the study committee format, they could be assigned from Brattleboro to the Union High School, and so Ricky is the voting member for, or Ian.
So both of us are.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Both voting members represent Brattleboro. So in terms of a quorum of the board representations, 3 out of 5 boards present. That's kind of the standard that we've used for the supervisory meeting.
All right. Any more questions on process or meeting law? All right. So let's go ahead to you guys. All right.
Well,
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That little detail.
yeah. So Alice asked me to just talk a little bit about the Freedom of Information Act request that came through my keeper. It came to, I think, most board members around March 23rd. I had a discussion with Mike last Monday, the 28th. So he is asking for this information. I'm just going to read the 4 bullet points and then add to it from our attorney's advice. So number 1, all minutes of any and all meetings of the WSESU Act 46 Study Committee. Number 2 is any and all electronic or written communication between any and all employees of the Agency of Education and the Act 46 Study Committee. Number 3, any and all electronic or written communication between the superintendent of schools and the agency of education pertaining to Act 46. Number 4, any and all electronic or written communication between the superintendent of schools and any and all members of the WSESU Act 46 committee, as well as any other board members and the general public. So, there's a lot to that. Our attorney has advised us that any of you that are affected by this, which I think probably most of us are, and I'll just leave it at that, would need to print out and provide hard copies of those electronic communications, email, or written communications to me, because I'll be collecting those and I need to hand those over. So I asked about, so electronic is obvious email, written communication, we're not talking about notes, but we are talking about if, let's say, the agency of ed sent me a letter or some sort of correspondence, I would need to present that. So it'll be important that each one of us start compiling these documents.
What's our
Do we have a
deadline?
date that we need to read?
I asked that of our attorney, and he hasn't gotten back to me yet, related to the time frame, timeline, in terms of what's reasonable. I mean, I have a copy of all the agendas and minutes, so I can provide him with that, that's a good document. But it's all of these other emails that go back and forth. So, as an example, Tom has asked me for some information, so I'll just print that email and send it to him. Richard, you had sent me some stuff, and I'll just print that as well.
Should that email, and I guess it goes, maybe even that Alice, maybe the emails like back and forth, like if Alice and I emailed each other about it. It includes all-
Yeah, if it's related to Act 46, you should. Yeah.
So what I'm gonna do is go in and hook up to a printer at the central office and just spend a couple hours printing, or a couple days.
So, for some of you, like Alice and Amy and others that I know have been in contact with different people in Montpelier and things like that, it's going to be much more dramatic. But for all the 18 of us, there's some. So in theory, they're requesting, or they are requesting 18 copies of the same exact stuff in some cases.
I don't know, yeah.
Because that's what they're going to get.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, like when I think about what I've gotten,
Yep.
I'm going to be printing off stuff that other people have gotten.
Yeah.
So basically, there's going to be 18 copies of it because it's all of us on this sitting at this table basically.
Yeah.
And so there'll be 18 copies of
And
it.
it's not gonna be my job or anybody in my office that's gonna sift through that.
No. I was just clarifying.
Somebody else's pile.
Should we though, isn't it what we have, thinking about that question, what we've actually written, things that we've received, why would we,
Communication, well,
communications received?
All electronic or written communications.
So I took that to mean anything received or sent.
Or sent.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I'm gonna start August 28th, that's the meeting that we had up in Montpelier. What I will do is, Amy, I think you received this, but I'll forward this request so that's in the minutes, so we can be clear about what the expectation is. Any questions?
So we want to have a target date to try and get this done by, even though we don't know.
I would tell you, do it as quickly as you can,
So
start
like
compiling it.
middle of next week?
I can't do it.
I'm out of town for a week on business, so I know it'll be.
Again, I'd say do it as soon as you can, and you don't want to put it off, but if you have other conflicts,
Yeah.
If I were doing that, I'd make a little notation that I can't do it until this date, and start working.
So I wasn't involved with Act 46 until I was voted on, so I wouldn't have to, if I had been sent an email just as a citizen about something happening about this.
It depends who sent me the email.
So now we are all testing our filing systems on our emails.
Any correspondence that was with respect to our particular boards?
Yeah.
right? Town boards, between our town board and everything that would be related to them.
And anything about putting together forums that's gone to you guys and trying to get information for slideshows, all of that stuff is in there.
It's gonna be very time consuming. Yep. Any more questions?
There was something about if there's a cost, because all of us that are running businesses
Yeah,
are taking
that's
away
right.
time from that.
Yeah, I haven't heard from the attorney, but I would document your hours.
Okay.
And who pays that?
How about the paper, like,
The person that requested this.
We'll pay for it.
I'm waiting for the attorney. I
Yeah.
think that's, Mike asked about it. Please advise him of any costs associated with this process.
Okay.
Um,
So I'm gonna open it up for public comments, guys. All right, I'm gonna go from here. Can we go over this way? Tom, do you?
Oh, that's way for a change.
All right, we'll go. You guys, anything? Then, you're good? Jody?
Well, I had a comment, but
Sorry, can you say? who
Jody
you are
Norman,
and your-
Dummerston. I had a comment that I want to say later, but I wanted to
Well,
ask,
now's the time to do it.
well, I will say it after this.
Yeah.
But I wanted to respond and ask the question about, several of you have had phone conversations with people. And I know in the past at other meetings, some of the people on the board here have asked if you have a written copy or could they send a written copy of that. And are those included in what you're talking about, Ron?
I asked specifically about notes.
Yeah,
He said, no, if it's a letter, if it's a communication, email.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, my comment that I came to make is, I wanted to say to people who had not come to the Vernon meeting that I thought that Scott Beck was very informative, and I've had a couple of people from Dummerston who have watched it on the video and said they learned more from that meeting than they learned from anything else so far. Couple of things that he said, he said several times he didn't think that we had time to fully educate everybody before a vote, and that we probably ought to consider slowing down. And his last statement, just as the video went off, was, quote, "It seems like there may be some problems." So I think people ought to watch that video, and I thought he was informative.
Who's next?
Sean Murphy, Guilford. I had a question about what you just spoke about in terms of a request for the information, and I was just wondering if the person that actually requested it did understand the amount of time and the difficulty of getting it all together, and whether that person would maybe say, on reconsideration, somehow change the burden of the job that you all are going to have to do to make it a little easier. I mean, it seems like a lot of the information is going to be a huge volume of information. And if the person that makes the request could modify that, that might be something to consider just to make the job easier. Because with all the things that have to be done, it almost seems like an additional burden. That was one comment. The other comment, I was sort of thinking about the incentives again, and I reviewed Rebecca Holcomb's the BCTV, and I think she indicated that the incentives will have to be paid for in some manner somehow. And I was thinking about it, and I made an analogy in my own mind that, you know, if you canoe and you canoe up rivers, it's something that you have to do to get from one place to another. And canoeing up the river could be equated to property owners coming up with the financial wherewithal to actually pay for education. So it's a hard job. And then if the incentive has to be paid for in the same river, that almost increases the volume of flow down the river, so you have a bigger job getting up the river. But if a district decided, okay, we have the ability to turn on a tailwind, And the tailwind could be, you have the ability to turn on the tailwind by taking the incentive. So I think if one looked at it from the perspective of all homestead owners, that tailwind would help in making our way up the river. So that's all.
Thank you, Sean. Anyone else?
Richard Verkstes from Dummerston. I'd just be curious, maybe you could exact the promise from whoever requested that. I guess it was Representative Hebert to read all that he gets. Yeah. Anyway, not to be facetious, but I'm curious to know if there will be any consideration given, any further consideration given to the default option in the articles. You may be discussing that tonight, but I would hope to see that it's just an up and down vote on accelerated if that's where you end up.
Anyone else?
I have a comment. I've been talking to lots of folks, listening to lots
Can you
of
say,
folks.
sorry, who you are?
I'm sorry, Tom Ehrenberg Putnam. And as I'm sure you're aware, there's a lot of mixed feelings out in the bushes. And, I have a lot of mixed feelings myself. I have some very grave concerns about the act. I want to be extremely clear that I'm very grateful for the amount of work you've done. I've sat on committees like this enough to know how much incredible work you've done, and I appreciate it. And I unlike whoever, I fully believe that the decisions you've made in the course you're taking is entirely in good faith. So I want to be very clear about that. As Alice can tell you, I stand up in town meeting every year to talk about what a great job the school district has done and the leadership shown by the central office, and Ron has been terrific. So that's not an issue for me. What is at issue, and Alice, your explanation just now clarified it for me. The insistence on the focus of only looking at the merger and the accelerated merger, rather than looking at a series of different options, rather than participating with the community and asking for community participation, as lots of other supervisory unions are doing around the state, where they're having discussions and roundtables and actually inviting a lot of comment, not in a 10-minute session before the meeting and then going back to business, but in an actual, okay, we're going to take that into account. We're going to really deal with it. So those are the kind of concerns I have about the process. And my major concern about it is that it's undermining. It's not a process that involves the very communities that you want involved. And I think people are feeling somewhat shut out. I am, and I've been coming to the meetings. There's a long history, in Putney at least, of people supporting the school board in every way possible. And this puts that on the line. This is a way in which people now are going to have to say, do I support my school board and what they're proposing? Or is it yes or no? And it shouldn't be yes or no. It should be an engagement. So I don't know how to proceed with that. I know that for some of us who are really disturbed by the notion of losing a local school board and having a centralized system, and that we're feeling, I'll speak for myself and others, so I'll say we, a little cornered, feeling a little bit like the options that are open to us end up being antagonistic because the engagement hasn't been there. So does it have to be a lawsuit? Does it have to be some other legal action? Does it have to be get out and organize to vote the proposal down? That doesn't help. That's not a process that builds involvement and caring, that harnesses the caring about the school that's already present in our community. It's an oppositional process. So I'm faced with either swallow it and put up with it, if I think it's really disruptive to my community, which I do, or fight it in some oppositional way. And I would earnestly implore you to think about some other method where the single track to the accelerated merger and vote it up or down is not the only option. And I don't mean a pro forma inform people and have a community discussion and then stay on the same track. That's not what I mean by community engagement. So I don't know how to ask that of you other than the way I just did, but I want to ask it because I think that those kinds of battles have the potential to really be destructive in small towns. And I've seen them in Putney, and I've seen them in other towns, and they reverberate for years, decades, and it's not good. And so I'm just putting that out there, that if there's a way to be more engaged and consensus, not just among yourselves, but with the community that you're doing this for, I would encourage you to try to modify your course to do that.
Does anyone want to say anything?
Yeah, I actually have experienced the acrimony that has developed, and it's not in one town. I mean, I feel like we are pitting towns against each other, and that's not, we didn't write the law, acknowledge that. But I think that is the downside to this law, and especially how this process here has unfolded. I have watched a lot of other SUs go through this, and they've started in a different manner. And yes, they're different, everybody's different, and I get that. But I wish there was a way to do this in a way that was less acrimonious.
I really do too, Dan.
Yeah, good, I'm glad.
Yeah.
Kelly Young from Guilford. And I come here and I've heard a lot about this, obviously not as much as I need to, and I do need to be better informed and intend to, but I was listening to Mr. Ehrenberg, and when he was talking about going from the small school boards into the larger ones. When my husband and I moved to Guilford, we moved here because it was a smaller community. We moved from Brattleboro. We appreciated the community here. We are now in the last year of our 4th child here. So we have really appreciated the small town school board, and we know these parents. In many circumstances, they know our kids or whatnot. And so I feel like, as a citizen of Guilford, I feel like there needs to be more inviting for people to want this process. I am hesitant to appreciate a larger body having so much control over our small town. So until I am better informed, that's the extent of what I'll say.
Thank you. Anyone else, or? Good? All right. So shall we go on with the agenda? Anyone want to say something, or are we good? Yeah. Okay, so what we're doing is we're starting our work session. We're looking at a report. This is a report, and I try to remind folks about this every time. This is a report that could be used for the accelerated merger path, but it also could be used for a variety of other paths to unification. So, yeah.
Fire needs a report from the board.
So this is a working draft report that Ron is going to share. It's a little different from the one we looked at last week, because I've been
March 31st.
Yeah, so you're looking at March
So it
31st.
was mailed out to you, mailed out to you? Richard? Yeah, okay.
So if it's okay with, and just remind me that Frank is going to share some information at some point. So just chime in to remind me. If it's okay with you guys, I'm going to walk us through this.
I was looking online. Mine's December.
Page
Thank you.
2,
Thanks,
it
Rob.
starts with, the Articles Agreement starts with an executive summary. I think Lyle wrote this language, perhaps? Yeah. Amongst others. Well, no, so there's 2 sentences? Kind of 2 sentences. Do you want to read this, Lyle?
Yep, in bold.
Yeah.
Currently, several schools in WSESU do not offer comprehensive extended day or summer programming. Opportunities will open to expand after-school and summer programs that could include academic, art, music, drama, and physical activities. Title I programming will be available to more students.
Okay, so that was just an example of some things that would be happening. Do you want to talk about that more, or can I keep walking us through? Okay? Oh, sorry, I need to see my agenda. Okay, so Article 1. So a couple of meetings ago, I think we were here in Guilford. I took us around the table. We were all disheartened and tired. We were exhausted, and we were talking about the accelerated merger. And it was clear that Vernon might not be interested in. Well, Vernon wasn't interested in that path, but due to choice and a variety of other scenarios that hadn't yet been considered, there was hesitation on Vernon's part. So we felt sort of battered. And we wanted to look at some other options. We didn't want to throw out the accelerated merger. There still was legal language to look at, but we wanted to look at some other options. One of those options, and again, we did not throw out accelerated merger and have not yet done so. One of the options was a path towards unification, which was through a MUD. And that's what we're looking, we've talked about that for the last 2 or 3 meetings. And so that's language we're looking at right now. Do you want to talk us through that?
Well, it's on the top of page 5. This was language that Chris Leopold had given us in the event, it's the bold section, in the event a majority of town school districts vote to approve the merger, but 1 or 2 districts vote no, a unified union school district will be formed pursuant to the provisions of Act 156 of 2012. In this case, the MUD would be named, whatever was decided with himself as union district.
Okay. Does anyone want to talk about that at this point, or should we just keep going?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I had some problems with having this clause in here, with having the vote for the MUD at the same time as the vote for the accelerated option. And I just wanted to, I have actually 4 bullet points to detail exactly what my problems with this are. First off, as a Brattleboro voter, if I'm looking at this document and making a decision, I can say, I like the idea of merging, but I don't like this. For whatever reason, I have issues with something in here and say, no, I want you to rewrite this. I want to merge, but not this way. This option takes that vote away from the surrounding towns. They don't get that to say that. They don't get to have that opinion that we don't want to do it this way, but we want to merge. Because we're telling them, if you don't sign on, you're out. Second, a Brattleboro voter could well want to merge only if all the other towns want to merge. Perhaps the school choice that we've talked about several times is appealing to them, but they're only interested in the merger if Putney's on board, or if Vernon's on board, because that's the school they want to go to. We're taking away their option to say, I like the merger with everybody, but I don't want to merge if it's not everybody or if it's not this town. Third, it could well change someone's opinion on whether to merge or not with the difference in the incentives. Someone could be looking at that and saying, well, for the 10 cents, it's worth jumping on this right now and taking advantage of it immediately. But for the lower incentive, which we're going to get anyways, I think we should wait. With this language in there, that person doesn't get to cast that vote the way they want to. And finally, a voter in the surrounding town is looking at this, and basically, we're telling them, you sign on or you're out. It's our way or the highway. And that is really bullying to these small town voters. And I just don't feel it's appropriate.
Does anyone want to respond to Ian?
Just that, it's interesting to hear that, Ian, because I guess I look at it as when you're voting, I'm voting to merge. That I like the idea of merging, that I've understood the idea of merging, or I don't. And it doesn't necessarily, in my mind, it didn't make any difference whether I'm merging with everybody or just a few, except that I guess I might want to know that when I'm voting, you know, if X number of towns don't vote, then it doesn't go through. But I don't know that that goes in the language of the vote as much as it goes in the information ahead of time. It also made me think, I wish I would have had that ability when I voted for presidential candidates. Well, I don't really like this guy, but he's the best at the moment. But if this guy comes in, I'd like to do that. I don't get that either. That would have been fun.
Two questions, I'm not sure which one I should ask first. So if 3 districts vote no, then it's not accelerated, it's not the MUD, it's going back to reviewing until next year. Does that matter at all whether who's necessary or advisable in the first paragraph of Article 1? I mean, let's say from our last conversation, Brattleboro is going to be the only necessary, I mean, we have to, I've been told we have to, but Brattleboro would be the only necessary one, all the rest are advisable. So does that mean if Brattleboro votes no and everyone else votes yes, just as an example, is it still?
It's no.
So is it a no to the MUD, or is it a no to the third option where we spend a year studying?
We'll probably go back and study.
So if Brattleboro says no, we skip both option 1, option 2, and go to option 3 as it's currently written.
I'm not sure what it says. That's true.
I thought that was what we
If
were
we say
saying.
Brattleboro was necessary.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, necessary, yeah.
Okay. You know, your first question about advisable or necessary, I think that was based on the Vernon situation, that Chris Leopold felt like Vernon would probably be advisable, that they're not necessary, given the discussion about school choice and maintaining that in Vernon.
Right, but let's say Dummerston was necessary and voted no. So does that mean we drop to a year of study?
No, I think it would mean if Vernon and Dummerston were out, you'd still have a modified unified union.
Even if Dummerston was considered a necessary district for the merger?
Yeah.
No, because if Dummerston is, if we label it Dummerston as necessary, and if Dummerston says no, then to me,
But
that
it's not
Right.
yeah. I thought we said last time we were only gonna call Brattleboro necessary
Yes.
because of its size.
Right, and then everyone else was gonna be advisable, that way we didn't cut our nose.
right.
And that was on the thought too, that because when we had analyzed and looked at things, if Brattleboro wasn't in on it, you don't really get the equity and the ability to put forth the programming because of the numbers. I thought that was part of our rationale as to why we said it didn't make a lot of sense to do an elementary merger without Brattleboro.
Yeah, that's what I recall as well.
So at some point, we need, the voting members need to vote on who is
Yes.
necessary and who is advisable. and also decide, and I think I'm on record in speaking for Vernon, at least the folks who talk to me, I mean, we would rather have option 2 being go back to a year of study as opposed to a yes vote is merge and a no vote is merge. But at some point we decide on this language, and I guess if this group says no to the second option, if Vernon votes no to form a MUD, or if 1 or 2 districts vote no, we go to the MUD, then we would need, I mean, are we voting, then we'd have to go back and say what's the previous language. I mean, there's no alternative language in there at the moment.
Can I ask my question, I guess, pertains to this discussion as well as one of the comments made by the audience, is that if we do go back to another year of study and we, took that language out there that would automatically transfer us into a MUD and take us back, what would that additional year of study look like? How could we do it differently to get a different outcome? I can't conceptualize what that would look like. I think that was suggested of how we could engage the communities. I don't know what that
A follow-up to that, my question was actually to Walter, the same sort of thing, is why Vernon would prefer that it not, and that it go to a year of study. What would Vernon hope to get out of the year of study?
Well, I think that's part of the problem. We're not quite sure. I mean, if, let's say, the MUD is formed and Vernon's the only one that votes no, and we're an outside district, in many ways, it sounds like we're exactly the same as we are now, although I'm not totally sure as far as like special ed being serviced down to our level. I mean, there's just some detailed things, but at least conceptually, it sounds like we'd be essentially the same as we are now.
You would go to self-evaluation or self-study.
Yes, and so right, so we're, some would say we're putting off the inevitable, that we can't be on our own forever. Representative Hebert, Mike Hebert, the chair of our board, suggests that if we're in a MUD situation, we are open to legal challenge for equity as opposed to previous legal challenges, which are sending students to potentially religious schools. North of Mount Hermon being the example that's often used. And that we would be vulnerable because our students are getting an option that, at least in this area, if not the entire state, other students are not getting. And so, I mean, I think we're just trying to figure out what are the best options, and I know there's a new clause that's shown up in this draft, but the best options for maintaining school choice, which once again, from what I'm hearing, and certainly we heard at the forum last week, there's at least a vocal minority, and I would suggest a majority of folks in Vernon who want us to try to keep school choice for as long as possible. So, I mean, but we're really not sure. I mean, we're worried that we'll jump into this, and maybe if we're in a MUD and on the side, it gives us a year to sort of figure it out, because we can always, go to the district and say, we're sorry, we were wrong, let us in. In general, that could happen.
I didn't understand that. I watched the video today, and I didn't understand what you're just referencing, what Mike was saying on the challenge part, because maybe I'm misunderstanding here too. If we form a MUD, then Vernon's out, right? Vernon's not in the MUD.
If they choose not to join.
Right.
But they could join.
Oh, so
later on.
So what you're saying is if Vernon joined later on, because the first step, I didn't see where that would be a legality problem for Vernon. If we formed everybody but Vernon and Vernon stayed on their own, where would the legality of choice come into question?
Well, and it may be that today we're open to a challenge on equity reasons, even being part of the current district. But I think the thinking is, even as a MUD, even before we went back and rejoined the full group, that we would be open to a type of legal challenge that we haven't been open to in the past because of the stipulations in Act 46. I've been told that we've had 5 challenges. I've also been told all of them have been on what schools we send our children to. Not necessarily that there's a question of equity in the education of Vernon.
So I guess I still don't quite follow how Vernon would suddenly be open to something different than what they are now.
And I'm not saying I'm 100% clear either. I think the thinking is if we have a little more time, maybe we can become clear.
Thank you. I was confused.
Yeah.
To speak to Beth's question about how we would do this differently if we were to get an additional year, I think we've done so much work to this point. Like Alice said, this document serves as a reference for other options as well. I feel like since we have this in place, it'll make future dialogues with the public more productive and less confusing, because we have a framework within which we think we can operate, and that way you can have I think that's part of the frustration. Everything with Act 46 has been so nebulous prior to this until we started actually working on this to see how we could actually come together in some way, shape, and form. So I think the dialogue might be a little easier, you know, to say, well, we've provided for that concern, you know, by this particular wording. And, oh, we didn't think of that, we'll add that in, you know, kind of stuff, so.
I guess what they're itching for right now is that's what they want, that's what I'm hearing.
Say that again.
I think that's what the community is itching for right now, is they want to have input on, we've got a rough draft here, and I think that what I'm hearing is they would like to have that back and forth feedback to go over article for article, to say, geez, I really like this here, but could we add this into it? Why can't we? Is there reasons behind it? And I'm wondering if maybe if we started doing a little bit of this back and forth, that we couldn't resolve a lot of some of the stress amongst the communities, so we can have a closer one community versus communities against each other.
So that's why you have it. That's, yeah.
I would say, I heard a lot of that when you had a forum.
Yeah, I mean, we had some great forums.
That's my question. I don't know how else you would do that other than having the community forums that we've had in Guilford and nobody has come. So if we have another year of that and still nobody comes, I don't know what else to do. Like, we've really reached out to the people of Guilford, and some people have come, but some people haven't and they can't or whatever. So I don't know how to reach those people and get their input. I just don't know.
I also think that much of the conversations ends up being about the nature of the law and not about the specifics of the merger. And I think to come back to Tom's question, I think one of the things that's difficult is that the law is very specific about what it is, and the more we hear about it, and the more we hear from AOE about where this will eventually go, you know, thinking about what Walter just said about, it may eventually, looks like it's eventually going to go in this direction anyway. So the debate about the nature of the law within the community is one thing. The debate about how we will form the union, or the district, is a different one. And I think we spend a lot of time on the law part and not enough time on the specifics.
Yeah, wait, so anyone else on the
Yeah,
committee?
I think one follow-up on that.
Joe.
Okay.
Dan and Christina, yeah.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Didn't hear what you said, she's behind Ron. I think one follow-up to that is something that came out of, well, it's come out in numerous places, but it was reiterated with Scott Beck on Monday down, or 2 Mondays ago down in Vernon, where if a community wants more time, one of the things that could come, there's no guarantee, but one thing that could come is that there will be a change in the administration. And that means that's from top down. That's governor, that's agency of education secretary, maybe, and it's also definitely the board chair of the Board of Education, whose term expires in February of 17. So having that time, don't know what will happen, but that's a possibility that some things could change.
Christine and then Jill.
I also think that there's opportunities for another small town to potentially join us and jump to our merger, which would make it 5 and 5 votes, which would feel a lot different to a lot of to people in small towns, I think. And I don't think it takes away all the concerns, but it makes a different feeling. And so it's only been us, but people in other communities have expressed interest of working with us. So it's things that we haven't considered because we've been looking at this stuff, but I think like, oh, are there other opportunities that we've missed?
Well, although we have talked throughout this process, is that if we were to unify at this stage, it's during the next stage that people would jump in, other towns would jump in. Go ahead, Jill.
Just coming back to the comment of Bess and the community forums and such, that in Brattleboro, as chair, I've made a specific decision of, we have talked about it at every board meeting, and we have definitely engaged the public with anyone who came, but we didn't hold any real specific forums because I felt like all of this is is very nebulous at this point, and we're finally coming down to something much more concrete. And to hand out something that says, well, this may be where we're going, seemed like it would not be real advantageous. And so we have held off, and we'll see, I guess, on how terribly wrong I could be tomorrow night when we do our first real forum on it. Although we did do at our town information night about 30 minutes. And the tone in Brattleboro, Ron and Frank, Lyle can speak up if they think I'm wrong, but Kim, was very much one of, thank you for explaining what the law is and why you're looking at it and where you're at in the process. And we look forward to hearing more when you guys are a little further down. So it took away, like you were saying, Richard, where the discussion becomes on the law and people not liking the law. And even at our town meeting then the following Saturday, there were a few comments on it, and again, it focused on people not really liking the law and waiting to see how we, as a study committee with all the outlying towns, what this group has been thinking through as the most rational approach to what is an existing law.
Yes.
If I could just remind us of, I think it was Jill that you referred to the spreadsheet of the various configurations. I think it was last meeting that really addresses, I think, Tom's question about what are the options and what does the process allow us to entertain. And I think it would be constructive if we just revisited that for like 3 or 4 minutes. But it gets to also Ian's question around, well, what is possible and what is not given the law as it is. So it's the configurations of partners. For example, Guilford is a K-6 system now. And the law requires 4 partners in a merger or 900 students. So if Guilford can't partner with Putney because there are 2 different grade configurations as a separate union. Dummerston and Putney could get together, but they're not 900 students. So, Jill, you illustrated all of this very well, and you had your subgroups. You had your subgroups analysis of this, and this is what is so easily overlooked from the community's point of view in terms of there is a path that's allowed and possible, and then there's all of these other paths that are simply not an option. So by us informing the public and keeping that in the forefront of as you just said earlier, Jill, as opposed to presenting to the public well, we have several what-if scenarios, there's very few that we've already looked at the ones that are a path under the law, and I think the study committee has done the work that illustrates the answer to Article 1, in terms of advisable versus necessary districts, what combination are possible and what are not. There are very few that are possible.
Okay.
To the point of what we gain if we take another year, I see 2 real things that we gain. One, people won't feel the emotional pressure of the time. That's something we've heard time and time again on both sides of this. We have to get this done because we're under this time pressure, or I'm upset because you're not giving me time to think about this because of this time pressure. We can really have a more relaxed, courteous discussion about this and have a better chance to bring people together. Are we going to solve the problems that Vernon has? I don't know, but we would have a better chance to do that if we weren't both pressured for time.
And my point is just that no one can partner with Vernon because they have choice, and none of the other schools have choice. None of the configurations without Brattleboro are possible because we don't meet the 900 or the 4 district. So this is what we've illustrated,
And it's another year, as Beth is saying and others are saying, another year is not gonna enlighten us on those configurations and those limitations.
And I didn't say it would change anything, but it might change the emotional response to these things. My second point is
He hasn't spoken, you've spoken
No,
a lot,
I-
Dan.
to what Dan was saying, which was the administration. We're going to have a different administration. So many questions that we've asked, the answer we've gotten has been something to the effect of, well, this is what the Agency of Education has allowed. A different Agency of Education might have a completely different framework of what they allow. A different administration could have a completely different interpretation of this law. Maybe not, but we'll see what the administration that we're actually going to be operating under is going to be.
Richard, oh, go ahead.
Well, I would just say a core concept that it's hard to imagine changing is the legislature allowing an inequitable structure where it doesn't exist now, and it's hard to imagine that they would bring that in where they allow two different structures in terms of choice and or grade level operations to exist, because you've got kids that have a different educational opportunity within a district, and so it's hard to imagine that changing with a new administration.
Dan?
Two things to follow up on Frank. I agree with you, Frank, that would be very difficult to see that structural change. But they may say, hey, you guys are one of the best SUs in the state, there's nothing wrong with keeping your current structure. You can do everything that we want you to do under that. So that is something that could change. So I just wanted to counter your point on that. My first point was, I'm really glad you brought up and I think you answered it with your second point to Ian, but I'm still confused, and I had given up on it. You had said Guilford couldn't merge with Putney or Dummerston because they're K through 6 and we're K through 8. I don't understand that, because if we all were to merge, it's the same thing.
That's right.
So
that goes away if all of us were.
Because then would be a K through 12. We would be one large K through 12 together.
Guilford could merge with us if they changed the way they did their 7th and 8th grade.
They'd have to offer 7th and 8th
Right,
grade.
they'd have to-
Right, I mean, so there is, again, it's about clarity of, that's what I get hung up on.
That's not gonna happen.
That's been, look, the conversation is about what could happen. And when somebody says it can't happen, that's confusing. So I just wanted to ask that question.
All right, so, Ricky, and then we'll move on.
Can I just say, I feel like we could what if here, and none of us leave this room, and we could what if here for the next 9 years, you know, and then hope and pray that the next administration does what we want it to do, or that this thing is going to change, or that piece is going to change, or the legislature is going to throw it out. And I think that, I feel like we hear a lot from people that, well, we're not looking at enough other options, but Frank, thank you for pointing that out, because you pointed out very well that there's only a few options that we have in our current structure. Unless something like Guilford was gonna start to decide to do 7th and 8th grade again here, and then they could do something potentially different, but then they might not reach the 900, or they may, you know, there's too many, I feel like we just need to know who's coming in, and then we can work out the minutia as to how we're gonna make that work, and how we're gonna meet the equity for the kids, how we're gonna meet the needs of those children that we're tasked with educating pre-K through 12. You know, that's what we need to figure out, but we can't figure that out if we don't know who's gonna do it. You know, and if I keep feeling like, you know, whether we do the accelerator or the MUD or one of the other potential options, maybe if we kind of do this little tweak, but I feel like at any given point, we could end up all being on our own, and worse off than we are now, if we can't agree to at least come together and then let's figure out the particulars.
Thank you, Ricky.
I'd like Beth and Alice to repeat what they said at your Guilford forum.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know that this is what you were talking about, but I was gonna say, the other thing to consider that we haven't really touched on is there could be schools, and perhaps Guilford is one of them, but that need this merger in order to stay a viable educational institution. And I don't know that Guilford is there yet, But I could see in the foreseeable future that we may be getting to that point with declining enrollment, increasing costs. Our budget for the next 5 years scares me, and so for Guilford, and I would venture to say the majority of my board members would agree with me, that this merger could be a lifeline for us. And so while that may not be the scenario in all of the surrounding schools, I think it's important to keep in mind that each of our districts have very different scenarios and reasons for potentially supporting or not this merger.
And the other thing that you said that was really compelling to me was that waiting another year means that the kids that need the equity that Guilford can't afford right now don't get it.
Yeah.
And so for them, this came up at their forum, and their whole board went around and said that's why they're looking at this, and they'd like to do it now, because they need it now. They can see what it does, the difference for their kids.
Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and move on to Article 2. There's some new language to consider. We have had, since we learned more through the Board of Ed and others, so that is clarified that Vernon would not get school choice. We've been sort of okay with the following language. The WSESD will provide pre-kindergarten through grade 12 education to all of the students in the unified school district. We floated around the possibility of grandfathering kids from Vernon, but we haven't had time to circle back to that. And so what I'd like us to do now is circle back to what we could offer Vernon.
Legally, we can.
What?
We can legally offer something?
Well, so we are allowed to, one can assume based on guidance from our legal counsel and Rebecca Holcomb's office that we could grandfather them in. And so what Ron and I have been talking about, grandfather the kids who are currently going, what we have talked about is extending that and requesting, say, Walter, 10 years instead of the, 5, 6, so that, a serious, so that the kids who've started at Vernon, basically, who perhaps even moved to Vernon, their families, so have that option. So Ron and I worked on that, and perhaps Lyle did too, I can't remember. And then the next two paragraphs just sort of explain why Vernon is in the unique dilemma they are currently in. So can we talk about that for a few minutes?
So just to be clear, grandfathering would be, 6 years from the current 6th grade going to 7th, and so we extended it to 10 years. And then we used the language that we had originally had in this working document, the first draft, where we were told that, it's a modification of that. When we thought Guilford Friendly Learning could be paying a school choice. And then this last bold paragraph, this exception belongs with that statute. That's the latest opinion that we have from not only the Agency of Ed, but also informally from the State Board, that once Vernon district doesn't exist any longer, Act 2006, and then any of those legislative statutes cease to exist.
So we should definitely hear from Walter, but it'd be good to hear from other people too, obviously.
Do we leave ourselves open for any legal things like this?
Well, they have to, the Board of Ed would have to approve it, but I would imagine that I think the Board of Ed fully understands the dilemma, the challenges that Vernon and the rest of us face because of Vernon being granted this exemption for all these years. So I would imagine that they would,
But I think
be generous with us.
I think best question is the legal challenges that
Or
we
you
talked
mean from
about
other
before
people?
with
Yeah, outside,
Yeah.
so
Or like-
could a parent of Putney decide, well, I want my kid to have the same opportunities as the kid living in Vernon, and since we're all in our unified district, why can't I have that?
Are you asking me the
I
answer?
guess I'm asking what the thoughts are if we're still open. I mean, I guess we're open to that kind of now, but
But we're less open because we are
we're
different
less
districts.
open because we're different.
I would suggest that if we are interested in this language, that we ask our lawyer what he thinks.
Is there a reason we have to define it in a number of years as opposed to saying that any child currently in the Vernon school system is grandfathered for their entire educational career?
You guys, we could talk about that now.
So even if you did that, then you would not, somebody that moves in wouldn't get it?
Exactly.
But.
Well, unless they moved in and registered their kid in school.
Well,
No,
Right.
No, it would have to be as of
that would drive up
2017.
some value perhaps in Vernon, right now. Get in there fast.
So you're suggesting a current kindergartner or a kindergartner in 2017, and anyone who's older in an upper grade?
basically guarantee it for the kids that are there now. All of them, beyond that, just the 10 years, and kindergartners too.
I wonder if we need to consider the family that has one child behind. Do we just set a date and that's the way it is?
I think you have to.
We've got to set some sort of a guideline, and I think like the 10 years is fairly fair. I mean, who's to say that Janie Sue doesn't get pregnant and have it, you know, you could continue this on forever.
Right.
And I think 10 years is enough time for families to plan if they're not happy with the system. Unfortunately, you hope that they are, or can come to the conclusion that things are okay. But 10 years is a substantial amount of time.
I think I prefer Ian's language to saying any current studently enrolled in the school would be able to see out their time there. I don't know that
Would
it
you
would
go
make
pre-K or would you go kindergarten?
No, kindergarten.
kindergarten.
And K through 12, that's what we're supposed to be looking at,
Yeah,
K
but-
through 12.
Just to play devil's advocate, what about a kid that moves in 3rd grade
Right.
after the fact?
No, it's anybody that would be existing right now.
Right, I would say they would not,
Yeah.
yeah. I guess I thought that they would know moving in that their child wouldn't be eligible.
Richard? Did you?
Well, I'm just thinking about it thinking about the conversations we had in Putney about how this is an expensive proposition for the district, and how much of a burden is it placed on the other towns that will join the district to let that go 10 years. That's just a question.
I was thinking a little bit along the same lines as in, what is the exact arrangement now? It's based on how much the state average is?
So, yes, they
And-
set it every year.
What if we happen to become lower than the state average? Right now, the state average that's paid out by Vernon is actually less than what Vernon pays to send
Right.
somebody to BUHS,
Correct.
right? So what if by some miraculous event, we became,
More fiscally
The
responsible.
lower of the two.
we became the lower of the two, and then are we
The law
shooting?
says that it's the lower of the two.
Oh, it is that way now?
Default, yeah.
So then we don't have to worry about my power. Do we have any way of knowing Richard's question of how much it cost us to do that?
Well, this is something that came up in a couple of the Putney discussions, which was that if we were to do this and Vernon was to maintain their choice, does that then mean that the district itself bears that burden of that cost? And does that mean that, for example, Putney taxpayers are paying for Vernon's choice?
The way it's worked is the state average has been lower than the BUHS tuition, so it's as a cost.
But once we are one district, there is no tuition.
But I think Richard, I'm not sure if I understand your question, but if I am, I would think yes, it would mean that Putney would be necessarily paying, but it would be paying for somebody in Vernon or Brattleboro or whatever else, no matter what grade, it's everybody's money's going into one pot to pay for everybody's kids.
Right.
So whether that kid goes to BUHS or goes to Northfield Mount Herman and they pay the state average, because everybody's money's coming together into one pot and then going out of that one pot to pay all the bills.
Right.
Yes, it would, but it wouldn't be any different than it is now, in that right now, all of Vernon's money is going into one pot and paying out those bills, but all of their money is gonna come into the same pot that Putney's money comes to, and Brattleboro's and Guilford's and everybody else, whoever else is in the
But
district.
then it comes back to, and again, I'm not articulating my position, but then it comes back to a Putney voter saying, then indeed, I am paying for someone to go to a private school, which my child is not.
It comes down to the equitable, not
Right.
so much the financial.
The financial.
And then you're back to is there a potential lawsuit?
Right.
But because we have an end date in the process,
There's inequity supposedly for 10 years, so.
Well, but if we tie it to the students, like I suggested, then it's not okay, Vernon gives this for 10 years. It's this student that has this privilege now doesn't get it taken away.
Walter, does this sound like something, I'm sorry, Christina.
It is a little different though, and I'm not advocating one side or the other, but in terms of where the money is going, if we're collecting in our per student money, if we're sending $150,000, $200,000 as a district to a private school as opposed to BUHS, it is a little different, I think, in the voters' minds. That 200, we're not going to build a wing. We can accommodate those students that are now attending private school. So it's money that is leaving the district. So I'm not saying one thing or the other, but I'm saying that it is a little different in my mind.
Yeah, just a few comments. I mean, on legal challenges, I mean, anyone can sue anyone for any reason at any time. It could be something that shows up tomorrow. And, you know, it just depends on, you know, how strong the case is made. I mean, I do greatly appreciate the study committee considering this sort of language in here, because it does directly increase the Vernon residents looking at the option of becoming a true part of the district as opposed to being a little side spur in the mud. I would I do like and once again, I appreciate, I think 10 years is more than I would have expected to see in any language here. I do appreciate having it K-12 for the reasons stated, but also the notion of you've got a third grader and a kindergartner, the third grader gets it, and I mean, there is the family issue, whereas if there's a cutoff, it's everyone in the school who does get the benefit. But I also think Vernon does not expect the other districts in this merger to take on a burden just to try to help us maintain our 60-plus year choice. But I do greatly appreciate it. I mean, I think this brings up the question again to Vernon residents of the importance of choice. Is that, there are other choice issues in the country that this seems to come up, and sometimes there's single issue concern. Is choice the only thing we should be concerned about, and choice for as long as we can do it, versus the cost? I mean, really, once again, it's not quite clear if we're in the district versus in a mud, versus we have to do a self-study, and certainly, those sorts of things, what the cost to the taxpayers is, because Vernon taxpayers would like us to be as efficient as possible, and I know there's some options with staffing, et cetera, that may be possible in the merger. And then the whole long-term sustainability. I mean, our numbers are good at the moment, but, who knows what it will look like in 5 or 10 years at some point. We need to, look at the importance of being in a district just to keep Vernon open as a Vernon school. But certainly, I know I greatly appreciate the addition of the language in this section of the articles.
So is it okay with everyone that I asked Ron to take this to Christopher Leopold and throw this language plus Ian's suggested language so we can get a sense of that? All right, folks? All right, so
and obviously that's something that the Vernon board on their Monday meeting.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So so we'll talk about the articles and the process and the timing if we were to vote these for consideration. But I'll do that at the end. So Article 8, which is, I can't actually remember how we talked about this last time. Have we talked about this in depth? So we feel pretty good. I think we feel pretty good about this, right? There was some. So Ian, you've spoken. Hold on. Anyone want to address these before Ian? Yeah,
We're talking about Article 8, the board makeup.
yeah.
I just wanted to point out that this is the one that people that I talked to outside of here seem the most confused about how these at-large voting works. So this is something that we really need to make sure we're communicating thoroughly to the public, because this is the number one thing that people are just like,
I think this language is pretty clear, so this is actually a legal language from Chris. Why don't we read it through right now and see if there's anything that is confusing about it, so we can send it back to him for clarification. Amy, do you want to read it out loud?
Sure. Article 8, Board of Directors composition. The proportional representation on the Unified School District Board of School Directors will be proportional to the fraction that its population bears to the aggregate population of all forming school districts in the Unified School District. Initial Unified School District Board composition is based on the most recent federal census and shall be recalculated promptly following the release of each subsequent decennial census. Unified School District Board representation. The Wyndham Southeast Unified Union District Board of Directors will be comprised of 8 school directors, all of whom will be elected at large by electorate of the Unified Union. 2 school directors are designated to be held by eligible residents of Brattleboro, and 1 school director is designated to be held by eligible residents of each of the following communities: Dummerston, Guilford, Putney, and Vernon. 2 school directors are designated as at-large members and may be held by eligible residents in any, 2 school directors are designated as at-large members and may be held by eligible residents of any of the above referenced towns.
Okay. Is it clear?
Very clear.
Winter.
I mean, yeah, there was some conversation on this at the forum last week. I think it's not so much the clarity of the language here, but why we would do this. What was stated at an earlier meeting is if we wanted each town to vote on their own representatives, then we'd have to do the 5-1-1-1
Right.
method, and that didn't come out of last week's meeting, and I think that would have been helpful. People see the 5 and 4 ones, and then they see this, and they don't know why this would be a preference to them with the whole notion of the Brattleboro majority voting for Vernon.
So we've talked about it several times here. I can email folks that other language, or perhaps, yeah, I guess I could.
Well, I know it didn't come up last week. Maybe
Yeah.
if it comes up at the forum in Brattleboro tomorrow, I mean, I think that was as much the question of how it's.
Yeah. So I think actually everyone has copies of that language in previous reports, so you can reference it yourself to explain. Yeah, but that's a good point, Walter. Okay.
Would it be useful in the actual Article 8 language to say, as an alternative to that model, and then give this out so that that juxtaposition is clear to anybody who's reading it?
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know, so that because that would be the most logical thing, would be the 5-4, and not to spend too much on that more obvious solution to this, but to make it clear that we considered that, but chose this for the reasons that we just described. So it would only be a short addition, just a small paragraph that said this would be the way that would logically, that perhaps most logically would happen, but we're choosing an alternative version for a wide for these other reasons. So that's already embedded in the proposal.
Is the voting the same regardless of which alternative? In other words,
No.
2 of the 5 towns get to vote on everybody's members, both options?
No.
Just the second option?
In the original, the 5 Brattleboro reps would be voted by Brattleboro voters. And then Dummerston, the 1 Dummerston would be voted by Dummerston voters.
In this option, everybody votes for
Everybody votes for all.
Maybe that should, I mean, I know it's statute.
It
for it.
says
I don't know
there.
that.
Well,
Yeah.
it
Does that
says,
say that?
Yeah,
Does that say
it's
that?
just- it
Does
does
say
say
How it's voted?
Yep, at large.
Yeah.
But given that many people will encounter this for the first time in this document, it might be useful to embed that in.
And the AOE actually has a document that explains that process, and that can go on the website. Yeah.
What I thought was sad in watching the Vernon meeting today was that it was like it was an accusation that Brattleboro was still trying to control. And that we've gone round and round on this on trying to find a way to not have Brattleboro, even though we are the larger percentage of population. And to not have that be it. And so it made me sad that at the Vernon meeting, it wasn't pointed out clearly that that's why that happened. That it was the person who was asking the question was offended that Brattleboro could vote for anybody from Vernon, for example. And that's how it works out, but it's designated now, so there's fewer coming from Brattleboro. So I urge us all to be very clear with folks saying that this is something that's being done in the opposite of what that person was interpreting. And it made sense. I was surprised, like Dan is too, I missed that, because it didn't seem to me that that would be how it worked out, but it makes sense that if you're going to push it to be out of the percentage and make it go, you have to have everybody voting.
I'm not taking questions.
I was the person that she's referring to, and I had,
We're not gonna.
but I need a clarity on this
Do you need-
as a member of the public, as to how this would be voted.
So what is your question?
My question is, and I think I misinterpreted it, but you can tell me, because I asked you if I was right, but I think we weren't agreeing, that someone would run from Dummerston, let's say, and because Dummerston has to have one rep on there, everybody would vote for that vote of one or two, or how many, vote for the one Dummerston person. And I think my misinterpretation was that everybody was voting on everybody, which would give Brattleboro, with a lot of members, you may have more Brattleboro people, but you would have separate people.
No, so you wanna?
Everybody is voting on everybody. We would vote, as Dummerston residents, we would vote for Brattleboro representatives, we would vote for the Guilford,
Yes.
Vernon.
That's what I misunderstood,
Yeah.
that I thought that you were voting on everybody at large.
They have to reside
And you're
in.
not, but you're
No.
voting so that you would end up with the one Vernon. one-
Dummerston.
Okay, that's the clarity that I needed
Be
to
a
have.
resident of
Thank you.
Dummerston.
But to be clear, it wasn't you, Jody, that I was thinking of. There were several people in that video.
Because I brought that up.
But there were several others that were even more confused and upset.
I can't imagine.
It's also just a little confusing that it says will be elected at large, and then you have at-large members. So there could maybe be not using a word
Could we just say elected by everyone?
by
in the
everyone,
uniform?
and then you have your at-large
I think it's
voters.
legal language, we can ask them,
Okay.
but I think that's
I just think it's a
intentional.
little confusing. That's all.
So how does it actually work then when we go, we get, if we want to run, if Christina wants to run as the Dummerston rep, then she would go around with a petition to anybody in the whole unified district?
So no, so those would have to be 30 names from Dummerston.
I think this was in the last one.
Yeah.
I know, that's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to remember.
30, if you're a resident of the town, it's 30 signatures. And then if you want to go for the at-large, you have 60 signatures from anybody.
Yeah.
And you're within.
And so then when you go to the ballot, what does the ballot look like?
Each
Everybody's
come
names
individually with whoever's running and,
Vote for one
One.
of these
Yeah.
people,
Yeah,
vote
for
for two
two.
of these people.
and then the at large will be
Vote for two of these
two of these people, so. So don't have any enemies in your.
And so if Dan, Christina, and Amy all want to run, how do we figure out who's the one running for the Dummerston and
It'd be under
They get to
individual.
decide.
Say so on
Somebody
the,
would
decide.
say.
it should say so on the ballot.
I know, but who decide, they decide when they go
Yeah,
to pick
and
out.
by what petition they take out. So if they take out the petition to be the Dummerston rep, it would say, on the ballot, it would say vote for no more than one, and it would have all three of their names listed, and you as a voter would go and vote for one of those three people, and whoever gets the most votes would become the Dummerston rep. But if, for instance, say you and Kim and Ian and I all decide to run for the two Brattleboro positions, it would say vote for no more than two, and you have four names to list. And it just depends on which petition you take out, whether you take out the petition for the seat from your town, or if you take out the petition for the seat. I'm assuming by statute you would be able to take out both petitions.
It's the same way now, if it's
Right.
1 year seat or a 3 year seat.
Right, yeah, you can only be on one place on the ballot. for the same board.
And so then that also brings up the question of the 1, 3, 2, and we said they'd be staggered, but how were we deciding the staggering?
I think it was done alphabetically.
It's already,
Yeah.
and that's the way it'll be.
Okay, can we move on to Article 11? So Article 11 has new language. This is, I think I may have put this in. The Union District will rotate meeting locations, providing board access in each town it serves and opportunities for the board to enjoy the hospitality and uniqueness of each venue. Yeah?
Yeah.
I think I took that from someone else. Sounds good? That works. Okay. So there's some new language for leadership councils. This is Article 12.
Yes.
Do you want to read that? Or take it, Ron.
Okay, so there's nothing new in the top of that, the school-based councils. But then when you get down to the bullet points, the leadership councils are legal bodies. Their meetings will be held in compliance with Vermont's open meeting laws stated here. Each school's administrative staff is responsible for posting agendas, minutes, and meeting times, as well as a chair. Council will have vice chair, clerk, and committee representatives.
And it's representatives. So that's, okay, so that's plural. It's a correction.
And then I think the new, well, yeah, there's a little version, all of the bullet points are the same, but on the next page, right after the bullet points on page 10 at the top, leadership council members will include one staff member appointed by the board chair, 3 community members elected at town meeting, the school principal, and 1 student selected by the school principal. So there's a little variation in the language from previous drafts.
So didn't we put it in that it would be the, not the board chair, but the council chair, which is actually the board representative assigned to that council? I just think it would be.
We need to clean that up later.
Yeah, I think it's a little,
Yeah.
it would be confusing, because if I read this, the way I read this, is whoever is elected as the board chair of this new unified board is making the appointments,
Right.
not the council chair, which we had said that the council chair would be the board representative to that council.
Yeah, so on the beginning of that Article 12 paragraph, councils will be made up of the school director representing the town schools. So it's kind of redundant, but it's not clear.
Yeah, it's not clear, yeah.
So we'll clean that up.
Maybe we should just have that membership in one spot.
Okay. Can we keep moving on? So,
John, just to clarify,
Yeah.
before we leave this, so the board chair of the leadership council, which is what this board chair is referring to?
And I think instead of board chair, it should say council chair, right? Which
Yes.
happens to be the member of the board.
Does the board chair or the council chair need to be one of the members of one of the elected members from the community, as written now? As opposed to the principal, just who, ex officio gets put on.
No, I
And
think
I'm
that-
just asking.
I would think that the 3 elected people would be in addition to the council chair, who was already elected as the representative to the district board.
So the council chair is the one coming down from the
Yes.
unified.
yeah,
So, yes, thank you, sorry.
okay, so we'll, yeah.
Does anyone take a crack at that?
Just change board to council.
Is it that simple? Okay,
On the, by the board chair.
just by the council chair. Yeah, okay.
No. School director will be the council chair.
Okay,
Yeah, he is like that.
you want to write that, Richard? Oh, you done?
Yeah.
Teamwork.
Yeah, just like, sure, I'll do it.
Okay. Can we move on? Yeah, 13. So this is new language. This is a new article. Do you want to read this, Lyle?
Sure. So, following Article 13, new, other considerations, school boundaries, following a rough draft language being constructed for future consideration. For at least one full school year following voter approval, students will attend elementary school and middle school according to their town district of residency. Students whose parents move out of the town into another town in the Wyndham Southeast School District may continue in their current school for the remainder of the school year. At that time, parents, guardians may request a school transfer following the agreement set forth in this article. And then we have the addendum pieces, portions of
It's Article 13.
Well, then, are you referring to the elementary school choice?
Yes.
Yeah. So on page 11, towards the bottom half of that page, draft procedures for implementation of the school transfer program.
So, we set, if you look near the bottom 2/3 of that page,
What page are you on?
sorry, 11. Wyndham Southeast School District Board shall permit up to 5% of the school students to attend another school within the Wyndham Southeast School District. No participating school shall be subject to a loss or gain disparity of more than 5%. When a school reaches its limit, no further transfer shall occur. The students must be eligible for enrollment in the elementary school of their home school attendance area in order to be eligible for enrollment in this school transfer program. Transfer students must be accepted on a non-discriminatory basis and shall not be discriminated against based on race, creed, color, national origin, marital status, disability, sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity. Transfer students must be in good standing as defined by the admission of non-resident students policy. Before accepting any transfer of students in or out, each school shall define its capacity limits at each grade level according to current policy regarding teacher-student ratio. Transfer students that would either increase class enrollment such that would require additional hiring of staff or decrease class enrollment such that would require release of staff may be refused. Capacity limits shall be annually reviewed and redefined. Each transfer student attending another participating school, unless expelled in accordance with the receiving school's policy and federal and state law, shall be guaranteed enrollment in that school until graduation or as long as the student continues to reside in the Wyndham Southeast School District attendance area. If a student changes town of residency within the Wyndham Southeast School District, she must register with the town school district of residency and apply or reapply for school choice program.
So, I just want to point out that, all of this language is in statute for unified districts as they are now. So some districts that are already unified are using this essentially school transfer policy to allow for that type of flexibility. High schools right now in Vermont have that same sort of school choice. The tuition doesn't follow the student. So
Therefore,
this is not new language. This is just something that other unified districts are able to do.
In the back, going back to page 11, where you have the percentage rate,
Yes.
currently isn't it 3% that you're allowing to come into high school from other schools?
It depends on capacity. Like VUHS has limited it to 10 students, 10 ninth grade students each year. It
I'm
used
just
to be
thinking
4.
from a small school to lose 5%, that could be a
Yeah.
big hit. So I was thinking, 3% sounds more logical, would less likely hurt a smaller school.
Yeah, we just plugged in 5%. We can look at
I'd like to change
100%.
Yeah, Lana, you were talking about stability.
right,
So,
And that's why I'd go to 3% for the stability of the smaller schools.
well, perhaps instead of a percentage, we use the words maintaining stability.
Right, I was thinking, what if it was the other way, Alex? What if we wanted to have, if we have a family that's, 2 families that are moving out that would dramatically affect the school,
Yeah.
and we wanted to let them stay, but that was over the 5% change? So that, I'm thinking a number is
complicated.
Well, so Frank points out 5% is a small number.
But, you know, Guilford's 100 students now, it's 5 kids. You've already dealt with that issue.
We have, but we don't, not that we don't want to lose those 5 children. We'd like to gain
So-
10.
So you have the upper limit where you can address capacity, but to restrict it to a number that's kind of gonna stay there for 30 years, it seems to me you would be better off talking about capacity on both sides of the scale. One is
Up and down.
up and down. And so provide future boards with that option.
What if, can't we just leave it like Alice says, with stable, or leave it to according to the needs of the school and be more vague or something?
I could look at the high school school choice language that BUHS uses, and it has to do with capacity and there's other
I
language.
mean, I know what our school holds here.
Yeah. Let me look at that, because it doesn't have a percentage, it's, yeah.
I would rather grow than move.
But I think the key in this is that we don't want to have to hire new teachers or lose teachers because of declining numbers.
And the other thing I think is key is that right now, we all know of kids that are going back and forth between our schools and how hard it is to track and stay with those kids because they move. And some of them move for a couple of weeks and sometimes they come back after 2 weeks or something. So
And that's what the heart of this, that's what
Exactly.
this is about.
that's what I like about it.
Yeah. My pet
Going
article.
back to Article 13, in which case at the time, parents, guardians may request a school transfer following the agreement set forth in Article 16.
I think we should move 16 up to 13, so it's
Just
all
make it
part
up.
of it. Yeah.
Okay.
That nice.
Or at least make it sequence, you
Yeah.
know, 13 and 14 would be that school choice.
Is there a date in here so that it
Yes.
would, when?
There is a date that parents would have to request and complete an application between February 1st, February 28th. No transfers would be allowed outside that time period. And then in the next paragraph, parents would need to notify the school annually by March 1st of their intent to re-enroll or go back to their home school. If a child goes back to their home school and then decides they want to go somewhere else, they would have to go back into the lottery and reapply.
I wonder if it's, I'm just trying to think through, is it advantageous to have these specific dates? Or is it more advantageous to say we're going to leave it up to the discretion of somebody?
Well, I think it's important just because you need to know for your staffing and for next year.
But you can still have people that are moving, right?
How does that affect Joe's comment about people come and go?
Right, that's what I'm thinking, you're still gonna have people moving. So, our overall goal with this, right, is to let the kids stay where the kid is getting the best education. I mean, the teachers already know, and we're assuming that that's better. And then I suppose the other half of the goal is there may be a kid that just in the middle of the school year really needs a change, bullying or whatever else, and I imagine that may happen already.
Yep.
So I'm a little worried about making language tight with the 5% or tight with dates that would hamper that goal. And you guys know more than I do, so maybe I'm not right to
We
be
could look at the
concerned.
concept on Article 13, students whose parents move out of town into another town during the school year. See how that would work into the other article.
Just that, I mean, you guys are hearing the concern, right? So now that we've heard it.
I have another sort of step back question in terms of, in Brattleboro, you attend a school based on, it's a lottery, I guess? It's not based on where you're living? Is that true? How do you?
They try to create neighborhood schools, but in some cases, because of capacity, like Oak Grove only has one strand of each grade. So when you have 20 kindergarten students, then you have to start thinking about other, the grade 3 or academy options.
It was more of a lottery type moving around before, and now we've gone back to more of a.
Oh, okay.
So you're not wrong in the idea.
Okay. And so there's no issues with if people want their child to attend a different school, that we're somehow, because we're all one union, that just because you live someplace, you're entitled to it?
I mean, that happens now. You know, with the Brattleboro schools, there's parents that request to go to school. Try to accommodate those requests.
And
But
those
then again,
would
it
fit
gets
under the
into-
dates, right? I mean,
What?
that, for those types of requests, the dates are kind of a nice thing because you'd have some idea.
And that's how I read that paragraph, that those dates would pertain only to not the like moving scenario, but the scenario where you're requested
Yeah.
for another reason, whereas if you were moving out, it obviously is gonna depend on when you're moving, not on those dates.
Yeah.
So I think only slightly related, so I apologize, but let's say we had 30 kindergartners in Vernon, who was part of a future district, and there was, you use 20 as a capacity, currently it's 25 in Vernon. But we don't want to open a second kindergarten, or the district decides we don't want a second kindergarten. Those 5 of those, or 10 of those students would be heading off somewhere else under a future scenario.
Not necessarily. I mean, what I'd be saying is that we have situations now where people are on the border of towns, and they would actually prefer going to Guilford than to go to Vernon.
Sure.
Dummerston rather than Putnam. So right now, we don't accommodate those requests.
Right, so I'm using sort of the Oak Grove, your Oak
Yeah.
Grove example, you have 20 slots and you've got 40 students in the neighborhood you'd like to go. 20 of them will have to head off somewhere else under the current.
Or Walter, the way I look at this is the exciting part of the merger is that you have so many kids throughout the district coming into kindergarten. How do we balance out those classrooms to be the most efficient? And hopefully also accommodate some of these parental requests that haven't been able to always be done.
Oh, sure, I agree. I guess, there are some students who want to keep, I would imagine some parents want to keep their, and I'm sorry, we're getting off on a hypothetical, who want to keep their kids in Vernon, and others would be excited about their children heading off somewhere else as kindergartners, and I presume would stay in the district. I'm just sort of wondering about how these things, as we look at transfer from spot to spot.
I guess the question would be, is it
Hold
a
on.
passive, is it a?
Dan,
is
can
it-
you wait a second,
Yes,
please?
exactly.
So, at previous meetings, we've talked about the flexibility of staffing, so I don't think that it would necessarily require 5 kids to not go to Vernon school. I mean, I think it would be an administrative call to look at how best to serve the students, and then have the flexibility to move staffing around that way. So,
Well, I agree.
Versus
It
closing
certainly
the door
costs
and
more money
saying-
to have 12 student kindergartens in Vernon versus
Yeah.
moving into a spot where there's capacity.
So my follow-up is it solely, is the decision or the request solely from the parents? Or does the district have the authority to make that decision?
I wouldn't say we'd be making that decision, we'd probably offer the option. We would just make sure people knew the options, just as we do in Brattleboro now.
Okay, so you don't, when you use your, I think what was confusing me, and I don't want to speak for Walter, but was when you use that example of growth. If you had too many kids, they go somewhere else, so how is that decided? Is that all volunteer?
Well, kindergarten, you're told where your kid's gonna go. When you go to do kindergarten registration in Brattleboro, the school you go to for the registration process is not necessarily where you'll end up. And so then you get the letter in the mail and it says, your child will be going here. Now, obviously, if you already have a sibling there, they keep the sibling units together. And then after that, you can request too as part of it, but you're not.
Yeah, and I guess my point is not that if we have 25 kindergartners in Dummerston, that we're gonna say, you 5 have to go to Putnam. I mean, I think we have to work through that in terms of hopefully parental requests and thinking about staffing. There's multiple ways to deal with that sort of, those numbers.
Well, there would be multiple ways under the merger. There aren't multiple ways right now, right?
Right. That's what I'm saying. It provides more options.
Okay, moving on. Yeah.
I have one point on capacity too, from Lyle's comment. It says here that it's reviewed annually. And I could see during the course of the year that it would be very important to think about capacity as decisions are made. So I thought maybe if there was a way to clarify that, and not be restricted that it's only annually, that might be beneficial.
Article 14, consider article language for community use of school and school property. This is one I've heard the concern from community members about sort of this new district forming and all the locks changing and people not being let in. Obviously that's an extreme, but I thought it would be very helpful to have language in the articles that clarified that would not be the case, and in fact the intent is the opposite. So I think, Lyle, did you pull this from?
Yeah, so a few schools right now have use of facilities policy, and this is just a sample of the WHS policy. It talks about, it's very involved, multi-pages long, so this is put in here as a placeholder for us to decide what we want
I
to
just took
do.
the statement of purpose.
You took the statement of
And
purpose.
and
I
quite
wrote
frankly,
pages.
yeah, you have all the different pages, and I included that in here because it is actually a policy that we have right now. So I think what we can do is cite policy, and we can look at the policy in more detail if you want to, and then just modify it based on a unified district. But essentially, it essentially allows the community to use the schools, and there's a procedure for that. I think there's a number of districts that actually have the same type of policy.
Build and use.
Yeah, it's the
that we
same.
do. But like at BAMS, if say, we wanted to use a room there, are you charged at BAMS now to use a portion of the building? Like Guilford, we don't charge.
If it doesn't,
Unless there's a, you know,
yeah.
if they've really left it a mess, we might not be.
See, in this policy, unless there's a requirement for setup, breakdown, and cleaning up, otherwise there's no charge. If you're using the whole gymnasium, let's say, then there is going to be a charge for, I think, the custodial fees and that sort of thing. And that would be in the full.
But that doesn't charge to parent groups. Now, who are you saying we when you? What's that? When you say we, who are you saying that's using the school? Well, if a group of parents want to get together for Zumba, if they want to use the gym, they come in and they use the gym and
I don't
clean
think
up
parent
after themselves.
groups
fall under that. I think it's outside of the school.
Like a wedding.
Okay. Or that was what I was trying. Or a civic group that wants a place to come in,
And
like
some
the
of the
town.
policies talk about profit versus nonprofit. So if it's a group coming in for profit and charging, then there could possibly be a charge.
Okay.
Well, yeah, and like there's, the high school auditorium gets used a lot for a lot of different things. So
Right.
depending on who's using it, there may be a charge, there may not be a charge, there may be a different charge based on the organization that's using it.
Right.
But if the parents were gonna come in and need to talk about something, that'd be a different situation.
So I would suggest when we get to that point, maybe a subcommittee can look at the full policy and decide, what the procedures are. Go ahead, volunteer. You'd like to volunteer to be on that subcommittee?
It's gonna be OSB as written, but with our own discretion. No, yeah, I mean, happy to.
So, I think we would look at the whole policy and kind of go through it. I don't know that the whole committee had to do that.
I was just hoping that my question is, would there be some interpretation to each school? Like if we run things a little bit differently than BAMS does, then, that was my concern.
Yeah, so like.
Is there anything about throwing it to the leadership council?
Yeah, that would be my concern.
Yeah, let's put something in there about putting the leadership council in part of that decision or passing it.
Well, I'd like to, as we have had supervisory union policies, I'd like to have that policy discussion at that level. But say if this thing went through in a modified vote, you have a year to work out that type of issue. So I'm just thinking, we've got a policy in place, we've got some other districts that have similar policies, we can kind of take a look at that, come up with the one that at least this committee thinks makes sense, and then have the next board, as it's gonna have to set policy, do that.
And as we do now, we have a supervisory union policy and it gets sent out to each of the boards. We could continue that and send it out to the leadership council. And then that would address, Alice, what you're talking about, having some sort of specific input on any policy.
Okay, guys, why don't we talk about schedule and then talk about what else this document would need? Right, because there are several things that it still needs. Okay, so you guys have been emailed a copy of this report. You can go ahead and share that with your respective school boards. There have been some minor changes. I don't know if we want to go ahead and put those in and then send it out again, but you certainly can start taking what you have right now. There will be, I think next time, what we would do is vote on releasing this officially to school boards, and at that point, you know, we'll determine amongst ourselves whether we want to vote on specific articles, such as the MUUSD and such. We'll have that conversation. But then we would have release to the school boards to get official commentary. School boards would have a couple weeks to look at it. We would collect, Ron and you folks would collect comments, concerns, and then we would come back here and talk about them and incorporate them as we see fit. Then we would, at that point, decide whether we want to go ahead and put this before the voters, let the voters consider this. And if that's the case, we would vote on it and we would send it up to Montpelier. We would then, they would review it on May 17th. But again, we would need to vote on that here to release it. Ron and I are going to go ahead and meet with the clerks, the town clerks, in a couple of days, just to alert them that this might be happening, and to talk about potential, the petitioning process, because it can be a little complicated. So this would be a new scenario for clerks. So that's in the works. So it's really important for all of us to be here on the 13th, and it's really important for Dummerston to make a decision as to what's going on with your community. So that, because right now we have 3 Dummerston residents sitting at this table, and it's uncomfortable at times. So I would like us to I'd like us to stay on schedule if that's okay, folks. Maybe just go a few minutes late. So do you want to quickly talk about what else can go at the end of this document? And yes, Frank, I forgot to call on you.
It's all right, I just need 2 minutes.
Can we take those, can you do that now?
Sure.
So sorry.
As long as we don't run out of time, because there was a
Yes,
couple
we
of things
definitely
that
need to add some things,
okay.
yeah. And that we can also do that next time.
Right. So it's just a handout. There was some requests for a little more financial data. So this is, we've received all of our final audits, and this is simply an update of assets, liabilities, fund balance in the general fund for all of our districts as of our most recent audit, June 2015. I added the lines 18 through 25 as part of just reference information, again, that you will see in the audits. Audits are available, which would be a much more in-depth documentation of, financial resources that are coming.
Frank, do you have anything extra to send out to them?
Sure.
Do you extra?
Actually, I do. I have
You have to huddle around and share, I guess.
Things such as, I had already provided the reserve fund balances for capital, bus, and so on, the, traditional sort of reserves that some districts have. New line, line 18, capital assets, which is net of depreciation, so that's in the audit report. You would see, land, building, equipment that's capitalized and then depreciated. Outstanding debt is line 20. The Union High School brings to the table $42 million in capital assets. Also, one of the reasons why that's so much higher than all the other districts is it was paid for by debt, 14 million still remaining. And then the line 22 is the year in which this debt is paid off. Of course, the Union High School being already allocated to the member districts doesn't really affect the union. The rest of the districts that you see, not a significant amount of debt going forward. Most of the debt is paid off in fiscal year 17, with the exception of Putney. 2032 for Putney.
Forest is looking good for Putney.
So
You
as
know
I
how we can do that? You know how we can fuel the pellet stove now.
So, for more in-depth information, I don't know if we would want to add audit reports to our appendix, but it's, very in-depth information. And that's where this is.
So how many pages is that?
Audit reports are, 30 pages, 30 to 40 pages. And they don't like them split up, so it's either all or none.
So it's 30 each?
Generally, yeah.
So it'd be an extra 150.
Well, I think we could ask Chris, or whether.
What?
Did the other,
200 pages?
well, the other reports?
No,
have
they
them?
don't.
No. All right.
I know they don't.
They don't want.
No.
Can I
Yes.
ask a question? So if you're saying that Guilford has no outstanding debt, so as a Guilford resident, I would be taking on debt from other towns. How is that going to be offset? I would expect that there will be some sort of offset in the tuition that we, or something like that. So you're asking us to take on the debt
Yeah,
of
but
other towns.
you have to remember that if there are building problems in the future, we all take that on. Right, so for example, Putney just put in, a new roof and bought a pellet boiler. And so that's that debt. We don't have to do that stuff for a long time. You might have that, coming up.
We've got to replace our oil tank, so if it didn't happen right this summer, everyone else would be paying for our oil tank. So it's one hand washing the other is what it boils down to.
It's a marriage.
Everything
comes
is the
together.
same. It's really the same concept as of the Union High School passing $55.7 million renovation project that all of the union districts contribute to that.
Yeah, so a level of magnitude is, Guilford is bringing the least to the table, so they have the most to gain in terms of what Allison was just saying. You're probably in the position that need the most investment in this facility because you haven't made the debt commitments that other communities have done, and you're in a position to benefit the most from the unification because you won't bear that alone. When we look across all of the other districts who already share in the Union High School debt,
So as I assume that you will be trying to do outreach in the community or more outreach or whatnot to try and get people to agree to this and vote for it, it might be a good idea if people were to see this, Guilford residents probably would say, So maybe if there are things that, such as you say that we may be needing some repairs, maybe some information about, okay, why would Guilford want to vote for it? So I mean, not just to me, but I'm saying that as you suggest.
If this committee decides to put this, we think that this is something that should go in front of the voters, there will be several weeks of meeting with communities. There will be something called study committee forums, and you would see a lot more of us, because we will then be talking to you, communities directly, led by our, study committee members who will go through that
Okay, well,
in great detail.
That certainly would be something that.
Oh,
we
yes,
discuss.
we have no doubt.
What I would say is like a capital plan, that's kind of a rough draft.
We've got a 5-year plan of items that we wanted and have needed to do. I mean, I'll just throw out there just for something. Our boilers are brand new, but we need upgrading technology for the thermostats and to incorporate a balanced heat within the school. Which, when we got quoted a number of years ago, it was like close to, I'm just throwing it out there, it's not a specific number, but you have to say $80,000. If you got 2 brand new boilers, do you invest in a whole different process, or do you just replace the thermostats and have an even temperature? It's like things like that we have to look at and see what's viable for our school, what's going to work, what's going to keep the costs down. I mean, there's so many things that we've looked at over the years, but because we've been trying to be so cost effective, we've negated to do some of them. And this is an option that we're going to be able to pursue collectively amongst the communities that, Putney may have things that they needed, Dummerston. I mean, we're not all going to jump in at once, but we're going to look at each process and say, prioritize who needs what, when.
I think the point would be that things that may be cost prohibitive to us right now, or may even cause us to not be viable any longer, would no longer be cost prohibitive, or may not be cost prohibitive under this implementation.
So guys, it's 8:05, 8:06. You have something, and you have something very quickly?
Very quickly.
Let's get Walter, then you, Tom, and then I want to wrap it up because we are running late.
Yeah, no, and I'll be very quick, and it's actually helpful because I was gonna ask about our capital fund that was raised by Vernon residents for the Vernon Elementary. So if in this year or sometime in the future, we become part of the district, that money gets rolled into the entire district, and then our capital, I think it goes out 10 plus years, would just be part of the overall review of priority, but this money would become part of the.
No, but is that a fund or an endowment?
We have, we have both, but we do have a capital fund where the money is sitting in investment somewhere. That's correct, Frank?
What did we talk about?
Well, because endowments were, Putney's got one, Brattleboro's got one of those. I mean, if that's the type of thing that it's different?
If the way I understand it is if there's a fund that's been designated for a specific item, that it would retain that specificity.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's just in a general capital fund, it's going to go into the general capital fund. But if it has a specific use or purpose, it will stay for that specific.
So this was a question that came up with Frank, I think last winter. So we do have a roof line in our capital budget because we keep replacing. So you're saying that money would remain earmarked for the Vernon roof?
That's, I believe, what we discussed.
Put that in the.
We talked about earmark.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we should refer to that in the article, but that's what I recall, is the committee saying that dedicated capital funds would remain to that school, no longer a district, but at that school until the resources are
We're depleted.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Tom?
If a town that is now a member of the BUHS district votes no and is not a part of the MUD, what happens to that town's ownership interest in BUHS?
It's very hard for me to explain that.
So,
Do you want to give it a try?
Putney now is a part owner of
Yes.
BUHS. So if we're not in the MUD and the MUD takes over BUHS, what happens to Putney's ownership interest in that however many $1 million building
We still
we
owe the
now own?
debt.
Sorry?
We still owe the debt on that.
No, but what happens to our ownership interest?
So you're talking about something was contemplated in Act 156. It's called the side-by-side configuration, where
you have a union that forms or reforms. So it's kind of useful to have a hypothetical if you want to illustrate the point. So, you know, something like Dummerston, Brattleboro, Guilford, and VUHS become a new modified union. Vernon is separate, Putney is separate. You are separate school districts, you have separate school boards. You are legally invited to participate in the high school segment of the new union with the high school deliberation over the resources and the education that is for the grade levels that you're sending your students to. So in terms of governance, you have that participation, and you have the obligation in terms of it's either an assessment or tuition or the debt. In terms of ownership of the assets, it's the same proportion. And you have whatever obligation you have on payment of the debt, you have on ownership of the assets. It is a difficult thing to quantify, though, when you get into what does it really mean, in that you're asking a question: if the union dissolved and sold all the assets, what is your benefit? That is, you know, would take a bit to work through.
So as it's already occurred in Mount Mansfield Union District, it's a modified union school district. Huntington decided to not join the modified union district. They are responsible for K-5 in their system. And then the rest of their students that go to the union middle school and high school, they are members of that unified school district. They serve on the board. They would still have that board representation. They do not participate in discussions at the elementary level for the unified district because it doesn't apply to them. They do participate in the union middle school and high school district. So I think that's probably what.
And it might be good to have some language that explains that,
Yeah.
so people know
Yeah.
what's going on.
Okay, we're already 11 minutes over, so
It
it's
just
really,
sparked a
really quick.
question in my
Yeah.
mind, because Tom's question makes me ask, so in the MUD, the Union High School is gonna be over, is that right? It will be dissolved?
Not unless there's a vote to dissolve it. Do you want to explain that?
Honestly, no.
Yeah.
I mean, I have it in my head, but I can't. Because, so in a MUD, if everybody else merges with the high school, then the high school has to dissolve.
No, the only time that the high school would dissolve is if everybody merges. If say Vernon doesn't,
Yeah.
or Dummerston doesn't, then the BUH, the high school would continue to exist. And
The high school board.
right.
Because if, let's say Vernon as a town votes now to join the merger, and everything else merges, the Union High School then doesn't have the same relationship to Vernon as it did before. And I remember back in December, didn't we say that to dissolve a union school district, it has to be a unanimous vote of each town?
So,
That's what this modified union proposed.
So it would dissolve, it would just.
It reforms the union in that there is no longer a UHS board in a district. It reforms the union into whatever K-12 group assembles.
But it would not be unanimous.
That's not what she's. That's not what.
Yeah, no,
Amy
what
said.
that's what he said. What he said is right, so.
So it does reform.
Right, the whole thing.
But it's still a union, and the rules of the union representation still apply. Because you're still a supervisory district in this scenario that you're describing. In that scenario, there's a union, and then there's two separate districts, and there's a supervisory union, and you have to go through all of the same sort of cutting up the parts and pieces and do the inter-district billing and do the proportional cost assessments and all of that stuff.
So what would the, let's say Guilford votes no, and everybody else merges. What would Guilford's relationship be to the high school?
The same.
The same?
We're not a member of, we're a Vatican.
Well, no, I mean, you're a member of the Union High School, so it wouldn't change. Again, they would be responsible for K-6
Yeah.
as a separate district, and they would still be a member of the unified district that offers 7th and 8th, 9th and 12th at the Union High School and middle school. It's the same thing that I mentioned with Huntington. So
Yeah.
Putney, as an example, would be 9 through 12 as part of the.
That clarifies.
Okay, quick, Jody.
Mine's quick.
This is the last question.
I'm not going to get into the weeds with this, but it just brings to the forefront that there are so many questions. Like tonight, I had so many questions to write down and ask about things in this article of agreement, and we don't have time to ask them and get clarity on them. So I would hope maybe the next meeting or so that there would be more time for us in here to get some clarity like what Tom was asking.
There will be plenty of time for clarity at the forums, Jody, if we get to that stage.
Well, before we get to that stage, I'd like to see it.
So, let's see, guys, if you have things that you feel should be attached to this report, Amy, I'm gonna ask folks to send those to you, all right? We next meet on the 13th, all right? And between now and then, I think you'll get the chance to, I think every board meets, perhaps. And then, so please do review these page by page with your boards, and then you'll get the chance to do it again, and then we'll decide how to go forward, all right? Do you have a question? Or is that a
I
motion?
just want to remind us that we want to put whatever handouts we had, we want to make sure they go up on the website.
Yes.
So like Frank's
Yeah.
handouts
Yeah.
tonight.
So those aren't going to get attached to the minutes, those are probably get right up on the front page of the website, okay? Thank you, everyone, thanks
I'll
for
make a
coming.
motion to adjourn.
And is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Good night, everyone. Can you do-